How's it going?
Good. I've done maybe 8 or 9 Zooms since quarantine started, and it has not gotten easier. It's always confusing.
Really?
Yeah, every time I open it, I'm like, oh, how come I'm like the only participant? Whereas every time it's like,
Well, this one wasn't your fault because I waited to click join because you get a camera preview, so I just wanted to make sure all the angles were good. So I was testing it out.
yeah, yeah, because I did one yesterday and it took a while, and I'm like, oh man, every time, and then so yeah. But yeah, before
Other than that, everything's good.
yeah, everything's good. Everything's good. So before we begin, how are you doing with everything going on? How's your family? How's all that?
Everybody's okay, thank God. I mean, it's been a very crazy few months for everyone. It feels like the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I think it kind of sort of forces, at least for me, it's been forcing me to kind of look inward a little bit and readjust a little bit of, my priorities and things that mean the most to me, and kind of also reinstills a lot of that too, because, a lot of the things that like family and friends, and really that's all you really need in life. And this quarantine thing has sort of proven that. So yeah, it's been okay. How about you?
Yeah, it's been okay. I think for everyone, or at least for me, it was like, okay, I've time to watch some movies, time to watch shows, catch up, and then you start to realize, oh, I've watched a lot of shows and movies.
Yeah, me too.
It's been 3 or 4 months of this, yeah. But overall,
happened to me too.
Yeah,
I
overall,
watched Mad Men in too little time for the amount of seasons that there are. It wasn't healthy.
But overall, though, from the world standpoint, things are great, family wise, and so
Good.
yeah. All right. Okay. So start. My name is Jibril Osman. Studio One is a platform that I created maybe 7 months ago now. I kind of felt like I wanted to start something myself after writing for Clash and the 405 and things like that, because I felt like I'm from Toronto and I felt like Toronto didn't have a platform that I wanted it to have. So thank you for being on it.
Thanks for having me.
Before we really start, can you just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll just get started?
Sure. So I'm Nikki Yanofsky. I am a singer and a songwriter. I live in Montreal.
Cool. So first question, talk to me what it was like growing up in Montreal, and when did you start really, I know you started really young in your career, but when did music really become a facet in your life?
Well, to be honest, there's never been a time that I don't remember music being a part of my life. It's been since I could talk. And I know a lot of people say that, but I'm not lying here. I don't think I could say full sentences. And here I was already singing as my album cover. But as far back as I can remember, music has been there for me. And it's been kind of a savior for me in so many ways, because growing up in Montreal, I had my family always by my side, and my friends, I didn't really have many friends. So music was kind of my friend growing up. I had Ella Fitzgerald and Aretha Franklin and Stevie Wonder and, all the greats that were really by my side through so many ups and downs, and taught me so much through their work. And it inspired me to want to do that professionally. But ever since, honestly, even in pre-kindergarten, I remember, it's one of my earliest memories saying, I'm going to be a singer when I grow up. Someone asking me and saying, I'm going to be a singer. It was always just what I felt like I was meant to do.
Yeah. And with that, at that age, did you start, I know it's really, really young. I think you did Montreal Festival when you were 12. Were you just writing little songs at that time, making your own music? How was that experience?
Well, the songwriting the songwriting on a serious level came after that. Before then I was really I always say I was a copycat. I was just listening to my favorites and trying to emulate them, as kids do when they get into music. It's how you learn. So yeah, the Montreal Jazz Festival came because at that age I was itching to perform. All I wanted to do was get in front of an audience, and I would beg my parents, and they were like, you're too young. They were always supportive, but not publicly like that yet, which I think was probably wise. But the thing with me is I was a very precocious little kid, and very in your face, and I was persistent. So I just kept saying, no, let me perform. I would make signs around my house. There'll be a concert in the basement at 7 p.m. Be there, I would put on shows for my family. So at a certain point, my parents kind of caved, and they're like, all right, you can start performing, but it has to be for like charity shows and philanthropy and like raising money for different causes if you're going to use your voice right now. So I thought that was a really good kind of value to instill and something I still keep with me to this day. But that actually led to me opening up the Montreal Jazz Fest because I was doing a bunch of charity shows around my hometown, and the founder of the festival heard me at one of them and asked if I would open up the whole festival. So at that point, it was just like the cat was out of the bag, and that was it. You couldn't stop me. But the songwriting definitely came after. Before that point, I remember writing songs like in the 4th grade, 3rd grade, but the lyrics were like, the fairies on my purple pajamas, like I wish they'd come true. You know, it was like very kid.
And with that, for a lot of artists that start really young or get their gears into things at even like teenage age, for you, being that this is 10 plus years now, when you look back on these memories, do you think of it as so long ago, or do you think, are they still kind of like fresh in your mind? Because it's still ongoing for you, if you get what I'm saying.
It's interesting because it's a good question. You know, it definitely feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like a long time. But what's interesting about my life so far, I guess, is that music is sort of a marker for me of like different phases in my life. So I think a lot of people, maybe my age, they think back to when they were 12, 13, 14, and they have like some memories here and there, but there's nothing really like, I remember days. Like I remember things so clearly just because of the events that I was a part of. So it's been really interesting to sort as a tool almost to remember like details of my life and see how far I've come. But yeah, it feels like so long ago, but I remember it all so clearly. So I don't know. It's kind of a bit of both, you know?
Yeah. And funny thing too, because I read that you're 26 and I'm 25. I remember when I was in 2010, I remember finding out that you were picked for I Believe and knowing that our ages were so close. It's kind of like a thing in school, like, oh, she's like our age. It's insane. So given that, I know with the new album that you released and with I Believe, I think turning 10 years now, talk to me about how much, well, the question really was going to be about, do you feel like with this new album, this is kind of like a new chapter for you, I guess, in terms of,
yeah.
I know you've said that this feels like your most personal album where you felt more free. In between that and I Believe, do you feel like this is like a new chapter for you, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I Believe was such an amazing experience and an amazing opportunity. And like, I'm so grateful for that because it really put me on the map, I think, especially in Canada. Before then, I was known for mostly just doing jazz standards and covers, which was great too. And I'm still kind of like, you know, in a box of, in some people's minds, of like a jazz singer. But I Believe was like a pop song, a huge pop anthem. And I think it kind of maybe decategorized me in some people's minds, which was good. But the thing with I Believe is that I didn't write that song. So even though I'm so connected to it and so, like I said, so proud of just being chosen to even sing that and represent our country at that age, especially. I mean, like from that standpoint, I felt connected to it, but like writing your own stuff is just different, you know? So I think from then it gave me like a good, I call it like a stepping stone to be able to write my own music and be heard. So after I Believe came my album Little Secret, where I co-wrote all the songs. And that was really the first time that I had done that. My first album called Nikki came and then Little Secret. But Nikki, I co-wrote only half the songs and the rest were covers. So Little Secret was my first album of like all original material. But I feel like the reason why this feels like a new chapter with this album is because with Little Secret, I was still younger. I wasn't really writing from a personal standpoint yet. Like I wasn't really telling stories of my own life because I was so young. I barely had any life to really talk about yet. And on top of that, I felt a pressure to almost please the people who love me from jazz and please the people who love me from I Believe and, you know, listen to me more on a pop standpoint. So the way I describe it is like, it's a pop jazzy album, but it's almost like I had one foot in both worlds. And when you do that, you just end up sort of in a split. And now I feel like with this record, I kind of forgot about all of that and just tapped into to what I want to say. So it definitely feels like a new chapter. And I think it's also very cool that it came out in a new decade because it feels like a new era of my music.
Yeah, for sure. And something that you touched upon too was this idea of being Boston jazz singer and things like that. With this new album and with kind of the new industry that we're in, kind of with the idea of nothing is really a genre, do you feel more at freedom now than you might have done in the past, considering how much you may have been boxed in? Because now with genres, there's really no, it's really fluid and like you don't know which is which. So do you feel like this new world kind of helped you?
Absolutely. I think that there's sort of a new wave of music now, and also just the way that people access music now. In the past, radio was really the only thing that mattered. We didn't have things like Spotify or Apple Music like we do now. They were just starting out, but it wasn't as huge of a platform. And also just, things like this, like interviews, and it was more like the narrative was radio, and that was it. You had to, if you wanted to be heard, you needed to write something that was commercial enough to get you on the radio, and that definitely boxed me in a little bit. It did. It made me feel like I couldn't be too jazzy, and I couldn't be too bubblegum because I didn't want to lose the jazz fans,
Yeah.
So it was kind of a complicated thing to juggle. And I think that now with music today, we are all our own DJs. We get to pick whatever we want to listen to, and you could be so avant-garde and so odd and have like a niche market for that on Spotify, and people like just resonate with it and love it. And it definitely took the pressure off in just creating something that I wasn't afraid to go a little darker in my lyrics and, like talk about some more serious subject matters that definitely won't get played on the radio. It's okay. I could just kind of be myself. And I'm really enjoying also listening to other musicians come out of that new wave of music.
Yeah. And circling back from in the beginning when you said when you're really young you kept to yourself and music was really your escape, and listening to all of these amazing artists really was like your world. Given that you've worked with so many incredible artists over the years, talk to me about being in the music industry and learning from so many great people. Tell me about like stories, or I guess not stories, just like what's the word? I guess I'm like losing my. I would say just like advice. That's the best way of putting it. Who's giving you some like really good advice?
I've gotten really amazing opportunities to be able to work with some of the people that I was referring to even back, like that I just listened to. So it's strange because you go from feeling like you have no real friends and the only people that you relate to are people that you don't know that you listen to, and then you actually get to meet those people. So it's been a wild experience for me in that respect. I actually never really thought of it like that until just now, but it was it's been amazing. I mean, I think when you meet these people, you have to stay so humble and so open to learning and trying to soak up so much knowledge and information as you possibly can, because I don't think that, when I worked with someone like Stevie Wonder or Herbie Hancock, they're not going to sit you down and be like, okay, here's what you got to do. Here's my advice to you. It's like you just learn from watching.
Yeah.
And from like kind of trying to pick up, watching how Stevie interacted with his band and how kind and how sweet he was. And then, Herbie being so like into the music and so warm. I mean, these people, I say they don't get to the top just because, of course, just because they're super talented and like, one in a bajillion. There's nobody like either of them.
Yeah.
But you can't get to that level being mean. And that's the common denominator that I've seen through all of like my favorites, is that they say don't meet your heroes, but in my experience, they've all lived up to it. They've all been so sweet and so nice. And that's like the underlying thing that I've really taken. Not only that, but like Quincy Jones has literally said to me, you have to have, grace with your success. And he's another prime example of that. So yeah, there's been so much advice in terms of like practical advice that you could apply to music, but also just life in general. I think that it doesn't necessarily apply only to music. I think that that is something that everybody should have in mind with anything that they do. So that's been like a very key piece of advice that's sort of stretched through every person I've worked with.
Yeah, for sure. Because incredibly, you got to be able to work with them, because just to soak up all the information that they've had over the years. And another person that you've worked with the late Rod Temperton. For me, like I watched like a ton of like music documentaries, and I really love music. So I guess I know, like a lot of people might not know, but I like know the songwriters, things like that. And tell me about, I guess, your relationship with him and how special that must be, considering how much of a fan you are of music. I can only imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, honestly, this could be like a whole interview unto itself because I have so much to say about Rod. Like
It really could be.
he was and is. I mean, he was like honestly, yes, my mentor and taught me so much about music and songwriting. But on top of that, we had so many countless conversations about anything under the sun. Like we talked about everything, and it sounds funny to say it, and maybe people will roll their eyes or not get it because he was like I don't know, in his 60s, you know, and I was like, we just were best friends. Like, it's crazy, but I would speak to him like once or twice a week on the phone about anything. And his wife, Kathy, always said that we had just a special bond that was ageless. And it was just like we were meant to be friends. You know, we had a really special relationship. And he was just an amazing guy and someone that outside of music I look to. I always ask myself, like, what would Rod do in any situation? Because as a person, he was so unaffected and cool and like didn't care at all for credit, didn't care at all for fame, nothing. All he did was just like sit in the studio all day until the day he died. You know, sit in a studio all day and just write and work, and he loved it so much. And he came at it with such like passion and love that like I don't know, he was just the best guy ever. I miss him every single day. There's literally not a day that goes by where I don't think about him. He, like, that's a picture of him. You really probably can't see it, but that's Rod right there.
No, that's incredible because just again going back to the people that you worked with, I just imagine just the stories of what they've had and what they've seen over the years. But
yeah, he told me some really crazy. I've heard some fun stories from Rod. He's like, yeah, he was just so like low key. I remember like riding even the tube with him like in London, you know, and I'm thinking if anybody like I would just look around and be like, every single person here knows something he's written, and no one knows who this guy is who's sitting next to me. Like he was so cool and understated.
And that's I kind of love that idea too, in the sense that like if you know, and it kind of makes it like all the right special. But on with this new album, because we can talk about that forever. With this new album, is it hard, I guess, to release it with COVID not being able to perform? I know you've done, I think, a few Instagram lives or you've connected with fans like that. Has it been hard to release an album without the idea of concerts? Or how have you been with that?
Yeah, it's been tough. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's just, I don't know that it's been harder. It's just been different. And, you know, different doesn't necessarily mean worse. It just means odd. It's a different experience. But it's also a bit scarier because I say that like performing live, I get to see how people are reacting to it. You know, it's like a conversation in a way. Like I sing and I watch people emote and feel whatever I'm feeling. And you know that you're not being misconstrued and that like the way that you're trying to come across is coming across. When you release an album kind of into the abyss and anybody can listen to it and you don't get to see their reactions, you don't get to hear how they're perceiving it or if they're, you know, misunderstanding something. Of course, music is meant to be understood however you feel.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit scarier. It is, because I don't have that like instant feedback. It's just like I released it and then I wait for people to like say if they like it or not, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to releasing in general, I've asked artists a lot of times, when you release a record, do you tend to move on really quickly and start recording and releasing, or how much time do you give yourself to, I guess, appreciate all the hard work that you've put into an album? Like with this album, have you been just soaking it in?
It's kind of weird because I've been finished with this album for like a good year or like a little less than a year. But like the mixing finished maybe like 4 months ago. So from that time to when I released the album, I barely listened to it. Like I listened to all the final mixes and everything. And then I take a breather and I do something else. I've been writing. I've been, you know, even sometimes if I feel like blocked in a writing capacity, I'll like, I love to draw. So I do like other creative things that just kind of keep me from feeling too antsy about like releasing the record. And then once it's out, I listen to it again and I revisit and I'm like, wow, like I can really appreciate the body of work once it's out on a platform and I see the order of the songs and I can just access them easily instead of like going into my mail on my phone and like clicking the mixes and the links, you know, it's just like all there. So it's interesting. Like that 4 month period is a very, I don't know, at the beginning you're like excited and then you calm down and then it comes out and it's like all the excitement gets stirred up again. Yeah. So right now I'm still sort of on that high, but I'm sure in like a week I'll be writing again.
Sure. Has it been easy or hard writing at home? Is the studio kind of the place where you get your inspiration, or when it comes to songwriting, what's your comfort? Has it been easy or hard?
It's been a little bit of both. I mean, the thing that's tricky about this is that you're limited to writing with just yourself, and I love doing that because I think that when you write alone, you can access a part of you that you wouldn't be comfortable, accessing in front of another person when you're co-writing. So, I think you're able to go more, like, just a bit deeper. Even the songs on my album, my song Black Sheep and the song Owe It All to You, those are two that I wrote without anyone. I just wrote those songs. And I think those are two of the most personal songs on the record because of that. So when I write now, it's like, I don't know, it can be a little bit daunting, but I try and kind of tap into that and try and understand why it is and then write a song about that. So it's like you're sort of you're forced to kind of reflect a little bit more than when you co-write. But then when you co-write, you bounce ideas off each other and you come up with something completely new and creative that the only special combination of you and that other person can come up with. So I don't know. I really miss co-writing at this point. I really miss being in the studio. It's been too long with COVID, but I've been just trying to stay busy and start kind of mapping out other ideas that I want to bring to a co-writer. Sometimes I do that too. This would be good to work on with so-and-so. And I shelf it. And then there's songs that I'm just doing alone. But it was tough. At the beginning, it was hard to feel inspired because we were in a pandemic and I was very scared like everybody else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you've had an eagerness of going on the stage and performing. When it comes to writing your own songs, and there's the vulnerability to it, do you feel a release when you release a record that's so personal to you? How did it feel getting comfortable with that idea of writing your own song and releasing these feelings? Is there a vulnerability for that for you, or
scared? It's the most nervous I've ever been releasing anything because it's the most personal I've ever been. It's tough. You're putting yourself out there to a bunch of strangers. It's a very strange feeling. I can't even equate it to anything else because it's unlike anything else. It's very therapeutic. Writing the actual songs were very therapeutic for me. And I felt like things that I was worried about or things like fears that I had, I put them into a song and it's almost like I was able to release them in that way. And now that it's finally out, it stirs up a little bit of those feelings again, but it's like you have to hold on to why you're releasing it, and hopefully that same release that you felt when you wrote the songs can provide that for someone else, kind of, to listen to it and be like, oh yeah, okay, that makes me feel better too.
Yeah.
So you sort of do it for the greater good. But Tom York, I'm a big Radiohead fan, and Tom York always says that the songs that he wants to release the least because they're the most personal are usually his best ones and the ones that people connect with the most. So I think it's almost like your duty as a writer to share that. If you can communicate something that nobody else can for themselves and articulate a feeling that maybe not everybody has the ability to articulate, you sort of have to. So that's sort of where I'm at with it. And now that I've started it, I keep saying it's like the lid is off. I'm just writing only personal stuff now. That's it.
I think as fans of music, I think we tend to gravitate towards artists that are vulnerable and honest because then we can relate to them. So it's always the really personal songs. But then on the flip side, we forget that the artist is talking about their own lives. We forget. But on that final note, usually with these interviews, I would ask an artist at the end, how do you see the rest of the year going with shows, all these things. But because I've changed the tone in the last question. For you personally, considering how you started so young in your career, what's something that you've learned over the course of your career that you would have wished you would have known earlier? And again, on that final note, what's something somebody told you as an artist that you've learned as well?
So for the first question, something that I've learned that I wish I knew earlier is that you can't please everybody. And you're the one who has to live your own life. So as long as you're satisfied and you're pleasing kind of that side to yourself, then I think that that's really all that matters. There's always going to be someone, writing a letter and God only knows where that they don't approve or whatever. You can't please them all. But as long as you're happy with yourself, that's really the bottom line. And the thing that I learned from a piece of advice that that really helped me also with that is actually probably from Quincy. He always taught me to decategorize music. He always told me that, it kind of goes with that. You can't please everybody. So just like make something that you're proud of. And he's a perfect example of that. He started out in jazz. He produced everyone from Dinah Washington to Frank Sinatra to Ella Fitzgerald, did arrangements for Ray Charles, like for everybody.
Yeah.
And then completely shifted gears in the 80s and 70s even, and started doing more like funk and R&B and soul and, Michael Jackson and all those greats.
Yeah.
And I kind of use that as an example of just like letting the music guide you and not the outside voices of what people think you should be doing.
For sure. On that note, again, thank you so much for being on Studio One. Honestly, I feel like this interview could have been so much longer just because of how many stories you have, but I knew I had to like condense it. But definitely the next time we do an interview, we'll touch on a lot more of that. Again, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Also, I really like the paint in your room. It's very happy.
You're right. That's like my sister told me it's like a nice, it's hilarious.
It's very like, it's a good vibe. It's just sunny on my screen,
Yeah. You have like the perfect musical background.
Yeah, I've set it up. I don't even play guitar, but it looks cool.
Right? Yeah, that's great. But can't wait to see you live too. I can't, when everything gets back and stuff like that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Studio One.